I am so pleased to be here this evening with our special guest. Director, writer, screenwriter, producer John Landis is behind some of the most incredible comedy films of all time and some of my absolute favorites, including National Lampoon's Animal House, The Blues Brothers, Trading Places, An American Werewolf in London, Coming to America, Three Amigos. Love all these movies. At ease in every genre, he wrote and directed the 1981 horror classic, An American Werewolf in London, and the groundbreaking theatrical short for Michael Jackson's hit, Thriller. It is with my deep pleasure to welcome my friend, John Landis, to the Ray Harryhausen Masterclass.
Thank you. What?
So, Jason and the Argonauts. Tell me the story when you first saw the movie.
Do you know what year did it come out?
1963.
So I was 12 or 13. I guess I was 12. So that means I saw it probably in Westwood Village, either at the Fox or the Bruin. And it would have been on a double feature then. In fact, I can tell you what I saw it with, which was King Kong versus Godzilla. Which I really liked. I'm not kidding. I love that movie. There's a scene in King Kong versus Godzilla it's a big dance number with the islanders who worship Kong. And Kong is a really funny gorilla suit. You know, it's really silly. But what's wonderful is the islanders, and it's a big number, big dance number, and all this stuff. They're all Japanese in blackface. But I enjoy that movie. Anyway, I loved this picture when I saw it, and I still love it. I think of Mr. Harryhausen's movies, it probably has the best screenplay, which Beverly Cross, and it's based on Jason and the Odyssey, and it's smart, and it has the best Hercules, I think, Nigel Green, because he's not a steroided guy. He's just this big, burly, brawny guy.
Bare-chested,
hairy, and I think it's a smart movie, and I like the depiction of the gods. It's fun.
When we think of Ray Harryhausen's movies, I mean, he'd already made a sort of Greek. He'd already had the Sinbad, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. He'd already made these sorts of movies, but yet this one.
How is the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad Greek?
Not Greek. But we'd seen mythological. He'd done a mythological film by this point, but this one does rise above. I mean, when we think of Harryhausen, I always think of this movie in particular.
Okay.
What?
I always think of Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
Okay.
But it's because that was the one I saw first. Yeah, that was the one I really had an impact on me. But
what is it about Jason that makes it so special?
Well, for me, it's the intelligence of the screenplay. It's pretty smart, and the way it uses the Greek mythology, of course, being a Hollywood, or British actually, but nonetheless, a Hollywood picture, they fool with it, they change things around, but they keep the essence of it. And I really like the way they present the gods. I always felt that the Greco-Roman gods, it's the only religion that makes sense to me. Because the Judaic-Christian God, the God of the Old Testament's a schmuck. I mean, the God of the New Testament is a patsy and victimized by the schmuck God of the Old Testament, and the Hindu gods are mean and cruel, and I mean, honestly, the Greco-Roman gods behave in comprehensible ways. They behave like people. They're jealous, they're horny, they're vengeful. In fact, it's something that the myths deal with. How they're always screwing around with us. And that's one of my favorite, the sequence with the blind man, you'll see what happens when you curse the gods. But it's smart, and it deals with the whole idea of Zeus and Hera and the way they go behind one another. And it all makes sense to me. I mean, it really is comprehensible. It's a religion that makes sense. It's like, oh, well, he did that because he's an asshole. That, I understand. He's not working in a mysterious way. He's a schmuck. I mean, you get it. And they're jealous, and it's intriguing. I like the way it's presented here. It's simplified. He takes a lot of the Odyssey and different pieces of Odysseus and Jason and kind of mixes it up. And he had the famous skeleton fight in Sinbad, where Sinbad fights this skeleton that the evil Torrin Thatcher made come to life. And he just felt, I could do better than that. And you'll see the sequence of the children of the Hydra's teeth, which is an amazing sequence in terms of stop motion, but we'll talk about it afterwards.
We'll get to that after.
Yeah.
But, before we get to, you've described Ray as the only technician who was an auteur.
Yeah, Ray is unique in the history of the film business, which is that he's a special effects guy. He's a stop motion animator, but he has his own body of work, and he really instigated the films. He would make concept drawings, and based on these drawings and outlines, they'd sell the movie and get scripts written. And then when you see the movies, they look just like his drawings. I mean, everyone would take their lead from him. And all the sequences that involved special effects, whether it was a flying saucer or a man of bronze or a dinosaur, he actually directed those, the live action parts too. So over the years, you look at Ray's body of work, and these movies aren't referred to as a Don Chaffee movie or a Nathan Duran movie. They're Ray Harryhausen movies. And that's completely unique.
As a setup for the audience, because there's a lot we're going to talk about after, get into Bernard Herrmann, all the sort of incredible parts of this film. But first of all, how many people have seen this movie before? Okay, so quite, but some who have not.
More than half.
Yeah. So
all right, get out. No, truthfully, something that I feel very strongly about, and actually Jesse mentioned it, is I'm grateful you're here because movies are meant to be seen on a big screen and with other people. And the more people you watch a film with really changes the experience. And a scary movie is scarier, and a funny movie is funnier, and a sad movie is sadder. Whatever the emotion is, it is intensified and multiplied being in a group, being in a crowd. And movies are meant to be seen big. And it's heartbreaking to me that most people now see films on, their laptops or their iPhones. That's not right, and it's not the way it's meant to be. And so it's why I support revival houses and film festivals, mainly just because you should see a movie in a theater, in a cinema. It makes a difference.
Especially a real spectacle like we're going to watch. What would you tell them to look for? Like what should they be watching?
Well, it's funny as technology advances. Sometimes people of a certain age will watch a movie, some of these movies, and they'll think, well, that doesn't look real, or gee, that's a problem. And the big leap forward really was in Terminator 2 and then Jurassic Park. It wasn't the CG animation of the figures, because in fact, in Jurassic Park, Phil Tippett actually stop motion. He animated those puppets, which was then fed into the computer, which is why they look so good. And then Stan Winston made that magnificent full-size T-Rex audio animatronic, amazing thing. But it's digital compositing. That was the big revolution. Because Ray and Willis O'Brien and everyone else were dealing with optical printers. And the opticals then, every time you made a pass, it was further generation from the original. And very often you'll see, sometimes you get the impression that the guy fighting the monster, they're not on the same plane, that the monster is superimposed on the image. What digital printing, digital compositing does is every pass is still first generation. It's what Dennis Muren's innovation with the Star Wars movies. Not the first two, but the fourth one, actually. But still, it's amazing because it's always first generation. So for the first time, they're on the same plane. The creature's not on the picture, it's in the picture. So that's something that Ray is always dealing with. And the movie that they're screening tomorrow night, 20 Million Miles to Earth, has a scene in it that I think is extraordinary in terms of not only conception but execution, where the little alien is on a table and the Italian guy's poking it with a pencil, and just the interaction between the rear screen and the puppet, it's flawless. And you really don't see that until, 10 years ago. So Ray is dealing with, I really believe that Ray's animation works on any level. And if you could take these films and recomposite them, they'd be seamless, they'd be perfect. But nonetheless, how does a man of bronze move? It's an interesting problem. You'll see.
I think we should let them watch the movie. Let's watch the movie with them, and we'll be back after to explain how they did it. And
but
talk
turn
more.
off this microphone. I don't want people to hear watching the movie.
Oh, it's still so great, that movie. I love those skeletons.
I'm sorry there weren't more. What's today? It
was December 2nd.
No, but what is it? Wednesday?
It's Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There are not more children here, because it's really perfect movie for a 10-year-old.
Which is exactly the age I saw it. And I remember the Hydra fight where he sticks the sword in. That always stuck in my memory. And then, of course, the skeletons at the end there. What an amazing effect.
No, it's an extraordinary sequence when you realize that now when you do stop motion, they have playback. So you can see exactly where you are as you're manipulating the figure. But for that skeleton fight, the second guy, actually he's the first one of the three who dies in the skeleton fight. He was an Olympic fencer, a famous Italian fencer, and he choreographed that. And they had to learn how to, when you think about it, first the actors had to do all that stuff so that their sword would be in the right place and kicking and all that stuff. And then, months later, Ray is in a warehouse or garage somewhere, animating these, I guess there's 6 skeletons. How many? 6. There's 6 skeletons. And what's incredible is there's no playback. There's no video. It's like, how does he know where he is? It's incredibly complicated. I'm always fascinated by that. And he would just have to have it in his head. Because, it's like lunch. You come back an hour later. It's amazing.
So let's talk a little bit about how they made this movie, because I think it's a great illustration of Ray's approach.
Again, concept sketches. What do you have here?
Yeah.
This is a sequence, obviously, they never did, Gateway to the Gods. But you're standing in front of the gods at Olympus. That's very much like what they ended up doing, although Zeus certainly looked different.
And he would have drawn these before they started production. These are
These are what got the money.
Yeah, that got the movie made.
These are before the script's written. He has an outline, he does. If you go to the next still, you see Zeus's POV from the movie. But it's incredible how he would do these wonderful drawings. It's the same way they had I'm trying to think of the artist, and I'm embarrassed I can't think of his name. But for King Kong, to sell it to Selznick, who was the chief executive of RKO at the time, they had these great sketches drawn. Byron Crabb was the artist.
Comics.
They're fabulous drawings. Anyway, what's the next thing you got up here? Oh, here you go. So that would be his drawing before the screenplay's written. And obviously, Talos is based on Colossus of Rhodes, which was a real thing, which I'm still amazed by, that gigantic statue. Anyway, and those are frames from the film, but you see how close it ends up being. What's the next one? Here's storyboard. So there's a storyboard on the bottom. So they're figuring out, because did you see, it's an incredible combination of rear screen projection. They kept doing these weird, I found them very strange, superimpositions of water, like little splashes.
And the smoke.
Yeah, it's very, and it's unfortunate because in those days with an optical printer, every pass, you can see the grain. You get further and further away. Now everything's first generation digitally, so it's always clean and crisp. But what's next? What else you got up there? Oh, here. Ray always talked about this. Here you see, that's Ray. Here's on a miniature set. Only twice did he ever do this. He was work for hire on 1 Million Years BC, the remake of 1 Million Years BC that was done by Hammer with Raquel Welch, is famous. And they hired him to do, and in one scene, there's like a giant iguana instead of a dinosaur. And people, always said, why did you do that? And he always said, money, because there just wasn't enough time. And the difficulty here was they didn't have the budget to do this as he wanted to do it. And what's fascinating is that water, is there a picture of the thing? I think. Do you have the next?
You want the final?
No, there you go. We'll go back again. Can you go back? You can't see the cameras. They shot this at high speed to slow it down. You can't do miniature water. It never works because the drops, it just doesn't work. So to give it some sense of scale, they shot it at high speed. And there's one photographs of the cameras that went so fast. And I don't know if you've ever seen those old Mitchell cameras. They make so much noise. They're just zooming to slow it down. And here's an actor, obviously, or a stunt guy, I don't know who it is, with his rubber tail. But what's fascinating is if you look at the shots of the rocks falling, they're actually quite good.
Yeah.
It's when they hit the water and you see that the splashes aren't the same scale. But it's still, listen, when I was 12, this totally worked for me. And that's the thing about what's fascinating about fantasy films in general, any film really, but the suspension of disbelief. And what Ray did, and he really did, and when I was a kid, it was totally successful, is that sense of wonder. And I also like that he tackled, he's dealing with the Greek myths, with the gods. And that whole byplay between the humans and the gods, it's always like, oh yeah? And Zeus is just so arbitrary. And my favorite moment in this, now that I've just seen it again as an adult, is when at the end he's kissing, why they called her Medea, I don't know. But he's kissing Nancy Kovacs at the end, and Hera's jealous. That's, interesting. Anyway, what's next? So these technicians, this is the final thing. You see the little tiny toy men there? Okay, next is, here's, I don't know what this was done for.
This is for the discus throw.
No, but what the actual design was done for.
For the flying of the discus over.
No, I understand. Yeah. I'm curious what this was from. It's obviously
from the book. This is from Ray. This was done by Ray for the book.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, look at what it tells you right there. Yeah. The 82-foot Argo built in the Anzio shipyards. It's actually, the best shots in the movie are the long shots of the real ship going alongside. It was shot in Italy. I'm not sure where, but really beautiful.
And in actual, you were mentioning to me while the screen was actual ruins.
Yeah, well, not the one sequence with the harpies. That always amazed me because that's a real temple. Those are real. You'd never be allowed to do that now. But that's a real Greek ruin. This is a diagram of how I achieved the apparently simple task of throwing the discus across the water and over the rock. But you see, the camera's shooting through different layers, and he actually has the discus suspended. One of the most remarkable things is anytime you're doing flying, like the harpies, they're on wires. So something you don't have to worry about now, because now you can just digitally erase it, are hiding the wires. I went to do pre-production on An American Werewolf in London, and Ray was in post-production on Clash of the Titans. And I went to visit him at Pinewood, and he and Jim Danforth were in this really shithole, this cold, it was cold, glass old stage that was kind of funky. I think it was a storage room, But anyway, they were animating Pegasus, the winged horse. And it was remarkable how much time they spent hiding the wires, trying to light the wires. And in my own experience, making the Blues Brothers and so many movies, we spent so much time hiding the wires, hiding ropes, hiding rigging. Now you don't hide anything. You just shoot it, and then you have CG guys just erase it. And the way you erase it is interesting. It's Photoshop is what it is. You just replace. But it's incredible to me with just how hard this stuff was, how labor intensive, just to get that shot of bounce, hitting the rocks. What's the next?
The next one is the real dynamation. So this is how he would have done most of. This was the fake process they call dynamation. But this is really this is how he did most of his work.
Oh, this is Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
That particular, yeah.
Well, it's actually interesting because you see a translucent rear screen projection. You have the projector there. Animation table to be removed before second exposure. This tells you exactly a matte painting. It's complicated stuff, and always has to be in sync and in frame. Sometimes you can see, like with Talos, when he's walking and he swings his legs over and his foot comes down. You can see the joins. But I love Talos. I just think he's amazing.
The sound that he makes.
Yeah.
When he moves.
Well, that's what sound you make when you're a bronze colossus thing. But I don't know if you could tell, but the whole movie is looped. And Nancy Kovacs and Todd Armstrong, their voices were replaced. Most of the other actors, that's their voices. But the two American leads, that's not their voices. And Nancy Kovacs, years later, she married, she was the wife of Zubin Mehta, the great orchestra conductor, who for a while was the conductor of the LA Philharmonic. And I'll never forget, I was at the Hollywood Bowl once to see some concert, and I looked over and it's Medea. I got so excited. And then I thought, can I say, sometimes when you go up to actresses, especially when they become grand dames, it's embarrassing for them if you go, I loved you in Jason. They look at you like, I'm sorry. So, okay, I'm sorry. So I didn't say anything.
But this is very similar to sketches that I've seen of Willis O'Brien's setup.
Oh, it's exactly the same. What Ray did was color. That made it much more difficult, believe it or not. But Willis O'Brien, their shots in Kong, and when you look at the clarity of Kong, it's amazing, but it's black and white and silver nitrate negative. So he had much more depth of field to play with than in this color stuff. It was interesting watching the film. Did you see how many shots were gorgeous, and then you'd cut to that grain, drive you crazy.
So what was their relationship like, Ray and Willis?
Well, Ray Harryhausen saw King Kong in 1933 and had the complete movie experience and was totally inspired and became fascinated by stop motion photography and did experiments on his own. And he actually went to Willis O'Brien and asked him for a job. And Willis O'Brien basically said, get away from me, kid, you bother me. But Ray started doing experiments at home, and he made these films on his own. His parents were very supportive. And then he was in the Army, and in the Army he worked under the Frank Capra unit. And he made, have you ever seen any of Ray's Army pictures? They're tank battles and things, but all done in stop motion. And then he worked for George Pal. Yeah. And then he got a call from Willis O'Brien saying, I'm going to do a picture of Mighty Joe Young. You want to work on it? Like, yes. And he became O'Brien's assistant on that. Obie, they called him. And in fact, in Mighty Joe Young, Ray does 90% of the animation. The last work that Willis O'Brien did, you ever see Mad, Mad, Mad World? Yes. There's the sequence at the end with the ladder. Well, there's a lot of stop motion in that, little miniature people flying around. That was the last work O'Brien did.
Now, I find it interesting on the technical side that there was so much mentoring. That Willis O'Brien, people like Dick Smith, like there was, the makeup, the special effects people really did pass on.
That's
what they
not
learned.
true. Actually,
No?
well, yes. In Willis O'Brien's case, he hired Ray,
Right.
and then mentored him. But no, his reaction was, "Get away from me." And in fact, Dick Smith was extremely unusual in being so giving. There was a memorial for Dick at the Academy, and the most remarkable thing to me was how many people told the same story. But everybody from, so many makeup artists and so many people told the same story, which is I wrote a letter to Dick Smith and he wrote me back and I asked advice and he sent the thing. And Dick Smith was amazingly generous, astonishingly generous. Young Rick Baker was his assistant. I met Dick on Little Big Man. They were shooting at the Veterans Administration near my parents' house. And Rick said, "Come over, we're making Dustin Hoffman old." And I was thinking, isn't Dustin Hoffman old already? Do you ever see The Hunger?
Yes.
I remember seeing The Hunger and going, "Hey, David Bowie's turning into Dustin Hoffman." I mean, it's the same fucking makeup. And then in Dark Shadows, Jonathan Frid, when he ages the vampire, it's the same. I'm thinking, boy, they got a lot of money's worth out of that mold. Anyway, but Dick Smith was an exception.
Right.
And he did mentor many people. In fact, makeup artists were notoriously shitty about it. And the Westmores, and there were people, it was union gig, and they were very secretive about their stuff. And Rick Baker can tell you some horror stories. And the union it's no longer this way, but the union used to deliberately keep people out and didn't want them to know how this stuff was done.
But how did you end up meeting Ray?
Harryhausen?
Yeah.
When I was about 11, I think, I wrote a fan letter to Ray Harryhausen, and I sent it care of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, which was I thought in New York. I didn't know Forey was in Hollywood. It was in LA. Somehow the letter got to Forey, and Forrest J. Ackerman was the editor. And he forwarded it on to Ray, who was living in London. And Ray sent me, I got it in the mail, 8x10 glossy of him animating a dragon from Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And he wrote on it in ballpoint, "To John Landis, best wishes for your success." And it was one of the great, I was beyond thrilled. And I still have it. It's on the wall at my library. And for years, Ray and Diana, his wife, would stay with us much later when I was successful and had a guest house. And they would stay with us whenever they in LA. And I always made them sign the back. So, I think the last one is "To John Landis, enough already." Yeah, there are like 20 of them. But then I saw him a lot whenever I was in London, and he's in 3 of my movies, actually. But he was a lovely, sweet man, and he maintained something that Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen and Forrest J. Ackerman, 3 guys I knew pretty well, when they were teenagers, they met one another at a revival theater showing King Kong. And they hit it off, and they were fast friends. And something they all shared, which was, no matter how, Ray lived to his 90s, and they all lived quite a while, they still retained their childlike enthusiasm and sense of wonder. They were not cynics. They were the opposite of cynical. And they were very warm and enthusiastic. And Famous Monsters was this, do you know that magazine? Oh, yeah. It's published again now, but it's different. But there was an interesting phenomenon in the US and Canada in the 50s and then into the 60s, which was television had millions of local stations all over the country in the United States, and I assume Canada. I don't know. Were there local stations, or was it all CBC?
No, local stations.
Local stations, okay. So they were desperate to fill the hours, so they used to show tons of old movies. And in fact, the RKO stations, Channel 9 in New York, Channel 9 in LA, and I don't know what the hell they were everywhere else, but the RKO stations used to have a thing called $1 Million Movie, which was insane programming, which was showing a movie, the same movie for a week, every night at 8 o'clock, and then twice on Saturday and Sunday in the afternoon and evening. And they would, I saw King Kong 400 times. You know, I saw it Terror from Outer Space. And Universal in the 50s, in the late 50s actually, put a package together they called Shock Theater. And it was all their old horror, Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, the Mummy, you know. And so there were local horror hosts, you know, they were usually the weatherman, you know, the local state. But these movies, that's how generations of us saw these films. I mean, Marty Scorsese, everybody, that's how you saw these old movies. One of the really sad things now is kids don't see old movies at all. They're unavailable. They're on Turner Classic Movies, but they've discovered that, you know, there's generations that see black and white and they go, ugh, turn it off.
For many of us here in Toronto, there was a show called Saturday Night at the Movies, which was on TVO, and hosted by this wonderful old guy named Elwy Yost. And he would
named what?
Elwy Yost.
Elwy
Yost.
What kind of name is Elwy Yost?
But he was fantastic, and that's where I would have seen movies like this for the first time.
What's interesting, Joe Dante, who grew up in New Jersey, is not much older. Well, I guess he's 4 or 5 years older than me. But the difference was the movies I saw on TV, he saw in the theaters. It was, you know, all those the Giant Ant movie. Well, I saw it on TV, but he saw it in the theaters. You know, there was the difference. But it was an amazing thing. And Famous Monsters, because of this, all these kids started watching these old movies. And suddenly, all these actors in their 60s and 70s, Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, Basil Rathbone, they became stars again. And they started, you know, AIP, they started making all these horror pictures in the 60s, taking advantage of all these old-time actors who, you know, all these kids knew them from all these old movies. And then, do you remember this? There was the huge monster thing. There was the Addams Family, and then what are the Munsters, and remember the song "The Monster Mash"?
Yeah.
And you know there was this huge renaissance of monsters, and it was a really interesting time. And so this magazine came out called "Famous Monsters of Filmland," which was edited by a guy, Forrest J. Ackerman, who really was a literary agent. He represented people like A.E. Van Vogt, Robert Heinlein, you know, a lot of Ray Bradbury, a lot of science fiction writers. You know who he represented? L. Ron Hubbard, who was writing Western dime novels. And he wrote a book, Dianetics, as science fiction. And then this is absolutely true. He invited Forey and a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of people over to the house, including A.E. Van Vogt, saying, the only way to really make money is religion. So I'm starting a religion, and I want a $10,000 investment from each of you, and we're going to clean it up. And it was called Scientology and Dianetics, and it was fascinating because they all went, you're a crook, what the fuck, you know? No. And he became this fabulously wealthy, totally insane person, and now it's a religion.
You mentioned the fact that Ray never lost that sort of sense of wonder, and that is what I find with the movies, is that there's a magic that we don't get as often nowadays with CG.
Well, it's not the CG. You can do it with CG. I've seen, you know, Terminator 2, when the robot guy, the Terminator, came up through that black and white linoleum floor. That was pretty wondrous. And you do get it from time to time. Listen, I still think the best fantasy film ever made is The Wizard of Oz, 1939. And that's a totally stage-bound, theatrical presentation. You see the painted wall of the stage. Does not matter. Yeah. I think that's the most successful fantasy film ever. And it's because of the script and the direction and the incredible performances and Adrian was the costume designer, Cedric Gibbons and Judy Garland. I mean, just brilliant people getting together and making this extraordinary, powerful movie. By the way, which bombed. Did you know that? The Wizard of Oz was not that successful. It became successful on television. But anyway, Famous Monsters of Filmland was unusual because it was, first of all, it was aimed at like 10 to 14-year-old boys. It really was. It was written very sophomorically with bad puns and silliness, but it had fabulous information in it, not just wonderful stills, but it did articles not only on actors, but on makeup artists like Dick Smith or John Chambers, on writers like Robert Bloch or Kurt Siodmak or Richard Matheson, on directors like Fritz Lang or Ruben Mullion, James Whale, on cameramen. I mean, it was a very unusual window into actual filmmaking. And the people who are the children of Famous Monsters, Marty Scorsese, I mean, Peter Jackson used to get it in Auckland, Guillermo del Toro in Guadalajara, you know, and it's incredible. Joe Dante. And when you found the magazine, you thought, I am not alone. I'm not the only insane person. Exactly. You know, it's a community of insane people. What's happened that's kind of bizarre, and it's a sea change in society, actually, which is what used to be exploitation is now totally mainstream. And really, you could trace it to Spielberg and Lucas, who made good movies. I mean, you know, Close Encounters, those are good movies, Jaws. But Jaws is the creature from the Black Lagoon. It's what happened, and Star Wars is Flash Gordon, you know. But what's happened that's so interesting, now B pictures are made with A budgets. And these Marvel comic book movies are like mainstream, 200 million. I mean, it's kind of weird. It's deeply weird to me. They're no longer special for me, you know. And when you see the next one and the next one, you take every major release in the last 8 years, 9 years, and Spider-Man, you know, the Spider-Man movies and the Superman movies and the Marvel movies and all these movies, and take the last 2 reels and mix them up, and you wouldn't fucking know. You know? And when you see cities destroyed, I remember that Superman enraged me, that movie. With Superman killing people, he's not saving people. It was like, what the hell? You know, I don't know. But also, you know what else I like about Jason? Is the Argonauts have real bodies. I mean, Argos, he's an older guy, and he's got a, you know, they're all tan and buff. I mean, but they look like real people. They don't have steroids. Or, you know, in 300 and then all the ones since, those muscles aren't real. Did you know that? That's CG. It's, you know, and it's just kind of weird, you know. I don't know.
And all those movies do tie ultimately back to pictures like this, you know.
Well, and also, do you remember all the peplum, all those Hercules movies that the Italians made, with Steve Reeves and Gordon Parks and stuff? I used to love that stuff, and I saw most of them on TV.
Let's take a look. So this is probably the most iconic scene, really, in the movie, is the skeletons.
Okay.
You don't think so?
I think, well, it's probably, it's most famous, I think, because of the intricacy. And also, it's great the way the score, the Bernard Herrmann score is particularly good for that sequence. And this wonderfully bizarre conceit, which is they rattle, but when they charge, they scream. And then they never say anything again. They don't scream when they're stabbed, but they scream when they charge. It was like, what? You know, there's some really wonderfully strange thing. And you know what drives me crazy? And it's a truism in movies that drives me crazy, even this one, is when people are shot with arrows or stabbed with knives, they always pull it out. They always pull the arrow. Do you know, by the way, just as a tip, if you're ever stabbed or shot with an arrow, do not pull it out. It's the worst possible thing you can do. There was one of the Rambo movies. He took this thing and he forced it through, and he like, ugh. I was thinking, what the? Anyway.
And he had done the first skeleton in Sinbad.
Well, that skeleton is one of these. That his dad used to make the armatures for many years because his dad was a machinist. And they're little ball and jointed steel armatures. And then, you know, just coated. There he is. And that's kind of wonderful. See the diagram of the armature.
Of how they were gonna, he hid it inside the sort of model. And can you describe the armatures themselves? Are like yay big.
Yeah, I have a bronze of that. As I told you, that Peter Jackson flew Forey to New Zealand to visit Weta. And when they do motion capture now and CG, very often what's called scanning, they do 3D modeling of a real thing. One of the interesting things about the Lord of the Rings movies, especially the first two, but most of it's makeups. And they work great. And then they just use less and less makeup and more CG. But that stuff with Chris Lee and the orcs, that's all, they look great, those things. And then they just became cartoonish. Yeah. Anyway, but Peter, Ray used to travel when he made appearances and stuff with the original skeleton from Sinbad that he redid. In fact, the sword, that I don't know if that's it or not, but the original sword he lost. So he was at some bar and they had a martini thing. There was a little sword, so that's what he had for years, and that's all the thing. But anyway, he brought the original skeleton from Sinbad that was reused in Jason, and he brought it with him to New Zealand, and the Weta guys scanned it and made an incredible digital model of it with which they made a mold. And I don't know how many, very few, less than 20, but they made bronzes of the skeleton. And what's so remarkable about it is it's not a copy of the skeleton, it is the skeleton. And I have one of those. They're very cool. It's about that big. But they also, by the way, scanned Ray. Standing there, and Guillermo del Toro by his pool, and George Lucas outside of ILM, and outside of Weta, there are life-size statues of Ray Harryhausen in a suit, and he's like this. And in one of them, he has the Cyclops, and one of them, it's the skeleton, and one of them, I don't know what it is, but he's holding puppets. Those are to scale. And when Ray gave me, and I treasure it, he gave me, they tested it, and they, once you have the digital model, it can be any size. You can do anything with it. So I have a perfect bronze Ray that's about this big. Standing like this, but there's nothing in his hand.
What more speaks to his influence than the fact that his bronze, the statuette of him now sits in so many filmmakers' homes?
Everybody from Jim Cameron, I mean, there's so many filmmakers who just will say, Ray, his films, a lot of it has to do with how old we were, because these are the movies we went to see. But the Harryhausen movies still retain a purity. They're not cynical, they're probably more innocent, I guess. I mean, when you see movies like, I saw 300, and there's some remarkable work in 300. But it's so racist and gory and homophobic and weird, and there's incredible work done in it. But to what end? I just then did you see the sequel, the 300? It was like, yikes.
Now this is we're going to end on this image, but this is on the set.
As evidenced by the light, we can see. What's funny about this shot is he's looking over at nothing. And that's something that's true in all kinds of movies. But I heard a wonderful story about one of the actors from Jason was talking about, at Ray's 90th birthday, was talking about Ray on the beach with a long pole at the end of which was a golf ball painted yellow. And he was running around going, "Keep your eyes on the ball, look scared, running around, And then when you see it, there's something to be fearful of,
What do you think, I mean, what has Ray ultimately meant for cinema? I mean, what is the legacy for a guy like Ray Harryhausen?
Well, his influence is vast. And I think that Spielberg actually said that, there'd be no, or was it George? one of them said there'd be no whatever movie, whether it was Star Wars or E.T. or whatever, without Ray Harryhausen. I mean, because it's true. When you're a kid, there are certain things that are impactful on you. And movies are powerful. In fact, one of the things that's so disheartening, now is that not all, I mean, there's wonderful movies being made, but the studios no longer make A, B, and C pictures. They just make these giant tentpole movies. It's up to the independents to make certain movies. And the audience has changed. I mean, are people interested in a monster movie anymore? Giant monster movie? What was the last one? Cloverfield, I guess.
Godzilla, I think even more recently, they did.
Wasn't that terrible? Wow. Jesus Christ! Although that director made a good movie. Did you see Monsters?
Monsters. Yeah.
Wasn't it good?
That was much better.
Very impressive movie. I don't know. It was weird to go see Godzilla and then he was a minor player.
Not enough Godzilla.
Yeah, just too many of those giant insect guys.
And I always prefer a guy in rubber suit.
I don't. I mean, I like guys in rubber suits, but I think, Guillermo del Toro made this movie Pacific Rim, and I was disappointed in it, but it had a brilliant sequence. Did anyone see that movie? No. The flashback.
Yes.
When the girl was little and terrified. That was a wonderful sequence, and it really did work because you got a sense of scale. How big it was, but those giant robots fighting each other, who cares? It's hard. There's so much work in movies, and it's just, it always breaks my heart when I'm disappointed, because I just know how much labor there was in that picture, and no one sets out to make a bad movie. I mean, nobody, believe it or not, and it's hard to make a good comedy or a good scary movie or a good serious movie. They're fewer and farther between. And there was a time especially starting in the late 60s with what happened was Easy Rider made so much money that the studios basically went, well, we don't know anymore. And suddenly, filmmakers were given a lot of power. And the 70s were a remarkable time in Hollywood, in the international film business, because you had everybody from Fellini to Robert Altman. There are people making movies in Hollywood. Hal Ashby, Paul Mazursky. Do you think Midnight Cowboy would be made by a major studio today? No, it wouldn't. I mean, there were so many great films.
Absolutely.
And it's so many. And you realize, well, why is that? It's because they were making, they were letting filmmakers make movies.
Including a little movie called Animal House, I think, was in there.
Well, that got under the radar. Let's ask questions.
Yeah, let's get the
anything.
questions from the audience. Raise your hands. We'll get a mic to you. Yes, sir.
Hi, John.
Hi.
My name's Larry, and the first thing I want to say is it's a great opportunity to say thank you for American Werewolf in London, and thank you for the Blues Brothers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a question, which is, you've spoken a lot about, movies that are kind of disappointing now and the big tentpole movies and everything. Do you have anything that you would like to make as a pet project, something that perhaps isn't a tentpole movie, that, something you've thought about for a long time that you think, that'd be really nice, I'd love to make this film?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
You want to tell us about that?
No. No, honestly, I don't. I mean, I have a number of things, but, I'm very lucky in that I made a certain number of movies that were very successful. And I'm now of an age where I don't have to work, so therefore I don't have to take shitty movies. I mean, you make movies for all kinds. Filmmakers make movies for lots of reasons. You make movies for money. You make movies for travel. You make movies for political reasons or personal reasons or because you have to, And I'm at a place where if I'm going to make a movie, I really want it to try to make something good. And it's increasingly difficult to be allowed to make something good. I mean, the last movie I made, I was very happy with it, and then the producers completely fucked it, changed it in post, and I was, and you can't whine about it. I mean, my son is now a very successful screenwriter, and he wrote one of the best scripts I ever read, and it was made into a terrible movie that's out now, Victor Frankenstein. I think they used 20% of Max's script, but that's what happens, So it's heartbreaking for him, but luckily I don't have to be in that position now.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Where are we going next? Keep your hand up.
That guy.
That guy in the middle. Can we grab the mic?
We can hear you.
We need the mic for the recording.
Oh. This is for the CIA.
I'll take it back to Jason. This movie just ended. He didn't ever get back to Thessaly or deal with his kingdom. Was this just, we hit an hour 45, we're done? Or were they setting it up for a sequel? Do you have any idea?
I assume they were hoping for a sequel, but I don't know.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The one animator in our generation that you mentioned working with Ray was Jim Danforth. And I'm wondering if you could tell us about his work and his contribution, because the first job he ever got in the movies was when he was 14 years old, and my father hired him.
On what?
He was working with, it was Tim Barr, and he was working with Gene Warren and Hua Chang, later on The Time Machine, but on a variety of other movies that they were doing at a small studio. And this 14-year-old kid walked in. My father said he could do things that all of us can't do. And
Well,
so I was fascinated to hear you mention his name, and it was the only one you mentioned.
Do you know that Jim Danforth has written, I'm very frustrated by it, but he's written apparently a wonderful autobiography about his entire life and career, which is extensive, and he's written it as an ebook, and it won't be published, but it has lots of prints and you should Google it, try to see if you've got a computer. I can't stand ebooks, so I'm a Luddite that way. But if you're interested in Jim Danforth was a stop motion animator and special effects guy who worked with Hua Chang on stuff on the George Pal projects, and then worked on, remember that TV series, Outer Limits?
Yes.
Do you remember the Xanthi Misfits? That was Jim Danforth, those creepy ant bee people, alien with human faces. And there was a movie that Nathan Duran directed called Jack the Giant Killer, which was kind of a rip-off of Seventh Voyage, and Jim did the effects in that. And Jim did When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, the Hammer film. He worked a lot and had a very interesting career. Talented guy. There are a lot of talented guys. I mean, Phil Tippett. There's so many. And I think you're showing the work by the Quay brothers.
Yes.
Amazing. There's just great animation being. And have you seen the Box Trolls? That's astonishing work. I mean, that's really good work. Or I don't know what.
Over there. Yes.
Hi, Mr. Landis. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
It's funny that you brought up Phil Tippett, because I wanted to ask, I remember growing up and really, really being inspired by the Ray Harryhausen stuff, but also the Phil Tippett stuff and the Stan Winston stuff. Do you think sort of the age of like John Dykstra, these real nameable heroes of visual effects, is done?
Not at all.
No?
No, I think it's evolving. And these things are just tools. It's just technology. So the issue is, how is it used? I think there's incredible stuff happening all the time. You know this creepy, scary thing that this iPhone has more computing power than NASA had when we put a man on the moon? You know, this stuff keeps advancing, and they do amazing stuff. It's no longer the illusion. It's how you use it.
Has it also become faceless, right? Like, it's just studios now. It's not people.
No, there's always someone in charge. No, there are people to blame all the time. What people don't understand about CG is it's actually more labor intensive than traditional hand-drawn animation. Did you know that? When you see the end credits of these movies, see all those thousands of names? They're all these drones at their computers doing this. It's hand work. It's hard. It's just to what end? You know, I mean, I'm not kidding. There's astonishing work done all the time, but who cares? You know, if you're not interested in the characters, if you don't care. I mean, I think a movie that I actually liked was Roland Emmerich's Independence Day. My wife and I laughed so hard at that. We were crying with laughter at that. We loved that movie. I don't know if Roland Emmerich meant us to, but there was something that happened in that movie that was remarkable. There's a scene where they go, okay, we're going to drop an atomic weapon on Houston. Maybe that'll work. And somebody goes, wait a minute, there's a couple million people live in Houston. Fuck them. Let's see if we get, and they do it. They drop the bomb on Houston, but it doesn't destroy the aliens. And it's like, damn. And I thought, wait a minute, you just killed millions of Americans. And then that movie, remember the building, the people on the building, spectacular stuff. Millions of people are killed. Hundreds of thousands of people are killed on screen, and you could care less. That was a real sea change, I think, in movies. It was like suddenly, fuck them, who cares? Whoopee! It was like so weird. And that's a problem. I mean, if you're not, for me, you know, in all these movies where you see I remember JJ made a movie, the Star Trek movie. You know, I enjoyed it, but at the end, why did the spaceship have to crash into San Francisco and kill 500,000 people? Oh, who cares? Next, you know. I mean, it's just, it's a new thing in movies that I don't understand. But it's art, you know, I may dislike it, but I'm not going to quibble with the effects. The effects were great.
Over here?
Mr. Landis?
Yes.
Over here, sir.
Right there.
Hi.
Hi, thanks
You
for
know,
coming.
when you're on this, I don't know if you guys realize, when we sit here, we have these lights in our eyes. So it's hard to see you guys.
Should I stand, or is this all right?
No, I can see
We
you.
got
Okay.
If I do this, I can.
You would know, when Ray quit making films, I mean, that's one of the biggest discussions on the boards is why did he? And the consensus is that he wasn't getting finance for the films he wanted, or he was getting tired of it. But it looked like he was so still involved in it that some people think maybe he just wanted to spend some time with his fans and whatnot, but there must have been.
No, when Ray retired, it was after Clash of the Titans. And even in Clash of the Titans, the impact of Star Wars was so great. They had that stupid little mechanical owl, their little R2-D2, you know. And it was just increasingly hard to finance the films that he would like to make. He had very high scruples, and he was offered, you know, he could do movies. I mean, stop motion is used all the time. I mean, people think it's dead. It's not dead. It's thriving.
It's just that he's Ray Harryhausen, and you would have been in a position to offer him a film that he probably would have taken. No? Did that come up?
Do you have several $1 million?
At
I would be in that position.
At that time, I'm sure you did, coming off the films you made.
That's a very naive and unsophisticated thing to say. There are very few people who can wave a magic wand and get a movie made. Very few. And there are people like, you know, what's his name, Ellison's daughter, Megan Ellison, who is, you know, her father's a billionaire, and she gets movies made because she pays for them. I don't have that kind of money. I wish I could make the movies I wanted to make.
Sorry to hear that.
No, that's true of everyone, not just me. Seriously.
Thank you.
We'll go in the front here and then come by you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Landis,
Where are you?
Right here.
I'm over here.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
I remember Jason and the Argonauts when I first saw it when it came out, but it contained music by Bernard Herrmann, and he's one of my favorite Hollywood composers. and there's a slight excerpt in one of his albums, along with other pictures that he had made. But to get to the current day, what do you think about Clint Eastwood, who is still producing or filming motion pictures, directing?
What do I think about him? I know Clint since I'm 18 years old. I was a gopher on a movie called Kelly's Heroes, where Clint and the Yugoslav army played World War II. I think Clint's made a couple of really good movies. And the fact that he's still working, I think, is terrific. And I think it's wonderful. I wish he was making better movies, but I'm thrilled that he's working. I think it's great. Few people are in that position.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, right in the middle. I guess I'll take my chance to say
What?
thank
I
you
didn't
for-
understand what that had to do with Bernard Herrmann. What did Clint have to do with Bernard Herrmann?
Well, no, I was supposed to be just one question, so I just made this other.
Oh. He was a great composer.
Almost everything that he has made on LP. I go back that far.
Okay.
I love that the Skeletons had their own like theme music. Like they have their own piece
Well,
to
Max
announce their
Steiner.
yeah.
Max Steiner took, and it's the word who is more educated than what's the word? L-E-T. Say it again. Okay, that's from opera basically, and it means a theme for each character that is then reprised. The first person to do that in movies was Max Steiner in King Kong. And there are many, many great Hollywood composers or movie composers. And one of the few things that's still done exactly as it's done since sound is scoring motion pictures. And I was privileged to work with Elmer Bernstein and many times, and Jerry Goldsmith and Nile Rodgers. I've worked with a lot of great composers, and it's an amazing part of the process. I just saw, who's seen Bridge of Spies? I just saw that, and 20 minutes in, I thought, this is not John Williams. Who the fuck wrote this bad music? Because the music drove me crazy, and it was so over the, it was like, enough. It was, what's his name? It was, thank you. I don't know if that was who it was someone, but it wasn't John. I could tell right away. It was like, this isn't good enough. Anyway.
You got another question?
All
Yes,
right,
sir.
I'll
In
go
the
again.
middle.
Hey, no, I wanted to thank you for Blues Brothers, just like the guy down there did, mainly because of the car chase scene. That it was one of those things that for years we'd heard Bullet was the best until I saw Blues Brothers. And that is the greatest car chase I've ever seen in a movie. But essentially my question was, you kind of started at the beginning of the sit down talking about how cell phone technology and little tablets are wrecking movies.
I didn't say they're wrecking movies.
Or just that it's hard.
I said that people should see movies in a cinema.
Yeah, well, I was wondering as a director, as a writer, to do this stuff, how do you combat it?
You don't. You
just
can't.
accept it?
You don't have to accept it, but you don't have much choice. That's a funny question. As a driver, what do you feel about the price of gasoline? And what are you doing about it?
We have time for a couple more. Yes, sir. Right in front.
Yeah, hi. I just completely unrelated to the film. I just have to ask, because just take the opportunity. Are you ever going to write a memoir? Because you seem to have so many great stories, especially about your early years before you started making films.
I've been asked a number of times by publishers to write a memoir, and I don't think so. I have to tell you, it's a strange process. My best friend in the world is a wonderful director named Costa Gavras. Constantine Costa Gavras. He's a French, Greek. You know Costa? He made wonderful movies. He's now the president of Cinematheque in Paris. And Costa's writing his memoirs. And I read the first 100 pages, and they're wonderful. And I just don't have the confidence, I guess.
Because every interview I've ever heard of you, like, and I've heard a number of them, the earlier years, like when you were working in the mailroom, like when you began in film, and then when you went to Europe and you were there for a couple of years as a young man, like working in Spain and Italy, those just sound like great. Completely aside from when you became successful, those sound like great stories, and I would love to read them. You know, I'm sure a lot of people would.
I appreciate that, and I wish I was a better writer because, also when you read, I think autobiography is bizarre. Biography, first of all, is untrustworthy. History is weird in general. I don't know if you've ever been at an event that's then reported in the press, and you go, "Wait a minute, that wasn't exactly like." Or have you ever been quoted? Have you ever been interviewed? It's a very strange thing when you realize that all history is based on contemporary reports, and all contemporary reports are wrong. You know, and look at what's his name, that clown that's running, Donald Trump. He just keeps making shit up. I mean, he just says things, and then when people challenge him, he attacks them. It's like Goebbels, it's the big lie. It's not funny. I find this stuff very scary. And it's fascinating the way the media just loves it because it sells soap, you know. And it's ironic that the Republicans attack the media. The media is their best friend. The media has always been, by its nature, reactionary. It reports, you know, and everything's subjective. Why? I don't know what my point is that I've actually thought about it a lot because I've been offered, people want to publish my memoirs. And I just find it odd. I don't have the confidence. I don't, you know, because when I just have read too many books that I was part of that and they're full of shit, you know? I mean, it's just not true. Or
But that would be the reason. I mean,
but my own memory would be my recollection. Everybody.
But this will be cool. It will be cool to hear your version of events, right? So.
It'd be terrifying. It's just very strange. I mean, there was a book written by Julia Phillips called "You'll Never Eat Lunch in What is it? You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again" or something. Yeah. Julia was a drug addict and totally out of her mind, and the book is insane. But it was a huge bestseller, and people loved it. And I was fascinated. I thought, well, none of this is true, but it doesn't seem to matter. You know, it's just, did you ever see The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance? You know, Print the Legend. I mean, it's just, it's a fascinating thing. Terry Gilliam, who's another very good friend of mine, has just written an autobiography. It's kind of a wonderful book, and very true to Terry, because it's like incredibly humble, and then egomaniacal, and then incredibly humble, and then, you know, and which is like Terry, and he's a brilliant guy. And there's a wonderful thing in the book. I'm reading this book by my friend Terry. I had lunch with him in London like 3 weeks ago. So I'm reading this book, and it's a good book, I recommend. But I get to this thing, and I go, hello, because he says, I only have two good friends who are filmmakers, John Landis and Martin Scorsese. And I went, well, that's good company. So, you know, whoa. And then he says, you know, but I'm going to paraphrase it, but they keep piles of DVDs in their trailers on set so that when they're shooting a scene, they can look and see how other people have done it and be inspired by, you know, that. And I thought, what the fuck? And I called Terry. I said, Terry, if that was true, my movies would be better. Why did you say that? And he said, well, Marty does it. I said, have you seen Marty do it? He said, yeah. I said, have you seen me do it? No. But, you know, you can't control it. You can't, you know, it's very, I mean, I would say, and I'm not exaggerating, at least 50% of everything written about me is not necessarily true. And seriously. And I'm not important, you know. I mean, I'm not like a historical figure. So it's, I don't know. I might do it one day when I give up, you know. But it's a strange, would you ever write an autobiography?
I wouldn't, but I guess.
Why not?
Because why? I don't have the storied history that you do. Sir.
Make it up. wait, seriously, what do you mean you don't have the story? I bet you have everybody has an interesting story.
I guess for me, like because I have the same issues whenever I'm always more interested in reading a biography than an autobiography because at least a biographer has a bit of distance. But when it's your story, yeah, I mean I do read both, but I think that when it's like you say, in the end it's going to be subjective no matter who writes it. So you might as well take advantage of it to write your own. I remember reading James Cagney's autobiography. He started with that, saying, "I never wanted to do this, but somebody finally said to me." Either you write it or someone else is going to write it for you. So he broke down and wrote his autobiography, and it was quite readable. And it was interesting reading it, like a number of them about him, and then reading his own version of events. And I think the same would apply like to anyone, in particular a great filmmaker like yourself. So
I've been very lucky, and my wife referred to us once. She said we're the bridge generation, and I thought that's obnoxious. But what's true is. When I started, I grew up in L.A., and when I realized I wanted to be a filmmaker, I don't blame you at all. When I realized I wanted to be a filmmaker, I sought out filmmakers, and I happened to be in Los Angeles. So I was very lucky because in the 60s, most of the guys who worked in the silence were alive. And so I went out and I knew everybody from Hal Roach to Alan Dwan. I mean, I met everybody. I made a purpose of it. And when I was a mail boy, I've never forgotten this because it made a big impression on me. So this is 66, 67, maybe 67 or 68. It was somewhere in there. George Stevens, the great American filmmaker, George Stevens, was making his last film. And it was called The Only Game in Town. It's not a good movie. It stars Warren Beatty and Elizabeth Taylor. It takes place in Las Vegas and was shot mostly in Paris because of Taylor and Burton's tax situation at the time. But they came back to the Pico lot, to Fox, to shoot pickups and things. So I was very excited that George Stevens was going to be on the lot. And I had long hair. I had to cut my hair and wear a tie to be a mail boy. It was like the only ones who were allowed to have long hair were either actors, writers, or directors. Nobody else. And so anyway, there's George Stevens, and he's walking along, probably with his AD, some guy. And they're walking along, and I have my stack of mail, and I just go up to him and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Stevens, I just wanted to say I'm such an admirer of your work." And he looked at me and he said, "Name 5 movies I made." And I said, Alice Adams, Diary of Anne Frank, Shane, Giant, The Greatest Story Ever Told. He's like, boom, 5 movies, there you go. And he said, "You're not French." And I had no idea what he meant. And he said, "Come and have lunch." And I did. I got to have a wonderful lunch with him. But what he meant was, this was in the 60s, and it was the French. He was talking about Truffaut and all those guys. And the British, actually, Lindsay Anderson and those guys, who recognized Hollywood filmmakers like Howard Hawks and George Stevens and Capra and Hitchcock as great artists. And he was baffled by an American kid who knew who he was. And it was just an advantage I had, which was I got to talk to the people. What are called the movie brats, Spielberg, Lucas, De Palma, Francis, Marty. I mean, there's all these filmmakers who made these fantastic movies, but we all grew up with, they're all older than me, but we all grew up with movies. And now it's even further removed. I mean, these guys invented the language. And they made movies from their life experience and stuff. And it's so interesting because now you have Quentin Tarantino making these fascinating, they're so meta. I mean, Kill Bill, this is a movie about movie. He's using score from other films, and she's wearing a costume from Bruce Lee's Game of Death. I mean, it's Pirandello. It's so interesting. And it was just, when I made Animal House, it's 1978, there were still guys who had been working on films for 50, 60 years, and they were grips. You know, those guys are all gone now. And there was a layer of expertise that was kind of amazing. And it was just, why the fuck am I telling you this? I don't know. But it was just, I was lucky. I did get to meet, you know, and I worked on amazing movies. You know, I worked for everybody from Sergio Leone. You know, I worked for everybody. And I was lucky. I would read that book. But I don't know if I could write it. I don't know if I'm a good enough writer to write it.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming here tonight. John, you'll be back tomorrow.
Yes.
John will join me tomorrow to introduce another classic Harryhausen movies, 20 Million Miles to Earth. So please join us then. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, John Landis.
Thank you.